Bob Wankel covers the Phillies, crossingbroad.com. We'll get his take on some of the things. And some of the things Girardi said today, maybe he cleared things up that Klintak wasn't able to clear up when he spoke earlier this week. I mean, Klintak was a little vague on a couple of things that I think need to be answered, that I think are going to be interesting as we take a look inside the Phillies now with Bob Wankel from crossingbroad.com. He, like all guests, appears via the Boardwalk Honda hotline. Bob, what's up, pal?
How are you, man? Good to talk to you.
Yeah, I saw, out of nowhere, I got a little email about Girardi at 3, and then I was like, I'm interested to see what's going on here. Feels like baseball's back. So do you agree that there are more interesting storylines with the restart than there was at spring training?
Yeah, this is something I've actually talked a little bit about lately. I think that, we've all kind of said, baseball's back, and the owners and players and everything that's going on with the labor negotiations have kind of, hurt the intrigue and interest surrounding baseball. But I think that the way that this season shapes up, though it's far from a perfect season, I think all of these new variables that are going to come into play are actually going to help create some intrigue and some added interest, and namely that we're just going to see things that we haven't seen before. And we are going to have roughly 15 to 20 teams coming down the stretch with a week or two left in the regular season that are going to be in contention. So, yeah, I think that we have an infinitely more interesting situation on our hands here than we did back in March.
Now, when it comes to the Phillies, you look at, I think there's a lot of interesting storylines here. One, let's start with this, because Alec Bohm, is he now a legitimate contender to make the opening day roster where maybe in March he was not?
Yeah, I think that has to be in play at this point, specifically when you saw what we saw today, which is that Scott Kingery is on the 10-day injured list, and we don't exactly know why at this point. I don't want to speculate. I don't want to, say that this has anything to do with the coronavirus, but we do know that usually the Phillies will indicate why a player is on the injured list. In the case of Scott Kingery and Hector Neris, Ranger Suarez, and Tommy Hunter, all four were placed on the IL retroactive to June 30th. And if any of these players, and as it relates to Alec Bohm, specifically Kingery, is out for an extended period of time, certainly that would seemingly open the door for Alec Bohm to play at third base, and they could move Dean Segura back over to second. So as that situation plays out, I think it's going to be very, very interesting. And really, one other thing kind of worth noting here is that Joe Girardi said it today. Not only could he not provide any update on those four players, but he also couldn't provide a timetable on when they return. And he said it was a possibility, his wording, not mine, that those four players or any one of those four players may not be ready for opening day. So if that's the case, then yeah, Alec Bohm very much becomes a factor.
Do you think it's worth having Bohm and Spencer Howard start right from the jump when it comes to their service time?
I do. To be honest with you, I understand the economics of this. I just think, especially in the case of Spencer Howard, there is a talent gap here facing the Phillies in this season. I mean, you look at the odds right now to win the NL East, and the Phillies have the fourth best odds. Now, they have the seventh best odds to win the NL. So when you look at the big picture, you go, okay, well, they're in it, or from the NL, I should say, to win the World Series. So you say, well, they're in it, but they're behind the Mets right now in the eyes of odds makers. They're behind the Braves and the Nationals. So they have to bridge the talent gap. And to me, I've seen enough Nick Pivetta. I've seen enough Vince Velasquez. You have this kid with a high ceiling. He has an advanced feel for pitching. I would take the chance and say, you know what, we're going to do something we have not traditionally done. We're going to roll the dice with a younger arm. I think that he gives you the best chance because he's the best pitcher out of that group. And so for me, especially when it comes to Spencer Howard, I would give him the number 5 job out of this camp. Will they do it? I don't think so, knowing the Phillies and knowing their history, but I think they better take a long look at it.
Well, what if the service time, they need to wait out, 7 games or so? I mean, if it's only 7 games, maybe for Spencer Howard it would be reasonable to kind of hold him off until the jump, and then you only get maybe a couple starts of a Nick Pivetta, which will save you in the long run, Howard.
Yeah, and I get that, and I certainly understand it. I just think, look, it's easy for a guy like me to say, or a fan to even say, forget that, lose the year. It doesn't matter. When it comes down to it, though, you saw what happened with Scott Kingery. Let me give you this example. You saw what happened with Scott Kingery. That he came up, and it's hard to adapt to the major league level and to adapt to major league pitching as it is, right? But then you have him playing second base and shortstop and the outfield, and you just never really gave him stable footing. Now you enter this season where the way that the schedule kind of presents itself, you don't have to worry about innings restrictions. This is kind of the time of the year where he would have come up anyway. Like, rather than jerk the kid around and say, like, hey, we're going to put you on ice for another 2 weeks, we're going to have someone else make a couple starts, but, based on how things go, you need to be ready. Like, I'd rather just give the ball to the kid and say, go do it. And if baseball and on-field production were the only consideration, I think that's how it would line up. But, yes, you do have to consider the economics of it, and fans don't want to hear that, but it is a possibility that they could hold him off for a week or two and then let him rip.
Now, Bob, with that, let's say Howard is considered. He's got to be in the rotation, right? Right? Let's answer that first. He's got to be in the rotation if he's being considered, correct?
I fully believe that he should be in the rotation. I know that there have been plenty of starting pitchers over the years that have kind of learned on the fly in the bullpen before transitioning to a full-time starting role the following season. But to me, this is your highest upside arm. I think that he's advanced enough where he shouldn't have to be in a spot where he's a long man or even a seventh inning guy. If this is a person that you believe is going to be a key member of your starting rotation over the next 6-7 years, then he should start in the rotation. And it's not like he's being blocked by some supreme talents here. We're talking about guys like Vince Velasquez, like Nick Pivetta, and even to a lesser degree, Zach Eflin, who I believe should be in this rotation to start the season. But these aren't huge upside talents that we need to find out more, about. So to me, yes, it should be Howard, and he should be a starter at the jump here.
All right. Then the second part of that question would be, what happens to the myriad of arms that were competing for that fifth spot in March down in Clearwater? Velasquez, Ranger Suarez, who I believe was on that injured list, by the way, along with Nick Pivetta. Do they all essentially just move to the bullpen?
Yeah, Joe Girardi talked a little bit about this today, the need to have almost in his mind 3 different rotations or 3 different plans for his starting rotation. Look at it. It's going to be very difficult to have the same 5 guys that you open the season with be the same 5 guys that you close the season with, even in a 60-game season. This is a virus, an evolving situation that I don't think that we have a great handle on how this thing is spread, and even taking proper precautions. I think there's a decent chance that from a statistical standpoint, one of these guys is going to get it or very well could get it. So you need to have that depth. And we've seen Nick Pivetta go back and forth to the bullpen already. We've seen Vince Velasquez do the same. I don't know what the status here of Ranger Suarez is, but I think that it's really a good thing to have a situation where you have 3 or 4 guys that could slot into that number 5 starter. But, yeah, if you have a surplus there, I think that they're going to be bullpen arms. And Girardi said it today. He plans to open the season with this initial 30-man roster. It's anywhere between 15 to 17 pitchers on it. So I think it's reasonable to expect that you're going to see some guys that were in contention for rotation spots slot into bullpen spots and pitch meaningful innings, because this is a wide-open bullpen with tons of question marks.
Now, quickly on Velasquez, Pivetta, Suarez. Now, Suarez pitched well out of the bullpen last year. Does adding those 3 guys to the bullpen potentially, does that make that bullpen better in your eyes?
You'd like to think so. Bullpen volatility year to year is a tremendous thing. You just really never know. I think the key to that will be, will they buy into it? I think that so much of bullpen performance with guys that have been groomed as starters and believe that they could be successful starting pitchers is just simply buying into the role. And, I don't like making comparisons to like the 2008 Phillies and drawing everything back to that heyday there. But Brett Myers, who I had talked to recently, had basically said as much. He said, I just wasn't mentally into it when I first had to do it. I then became very mentally into it, and I became very good at it. And so I think that that's going to be the buy-in. Will Vince Velasquez embrace that role? Would Nick Pivetta embrace that role? And if they do, I think that their stuff plays well enough, even as 2-pitch pitchers that have a little bit of a difficulty consistently locating their stuff, I think that they could have some success in those roles.
Is it fair to question what is happening with these players in the bullpen when it comes to injury? That David Robertson injury, And the fact that he got Tommy John so much later is ridiculous. And then with Seranthony Dominguez, he should have had that surgery way before it happened as well. I mean, everyone brings up Tanaka as the one person where it actually worked to rehab it. What are they going to do with this bullpen when it comes to the later inning guys? And, is it fair to question what is happening when it comes to these injuries?
Yeah, it's absolutely fair to question what's happening with these injuries. 100%. As far as this goes, I mean, the player ultimately has say over what they're going to do. And it's hard to know specifically if the Phillies had indicated to, let's say, David Robertson, you need to have this surgery as soon as possible. I was under the impression a year ago, kind of talking to some people, that Dominguez wanted a second opinion. He wanted to put this thing off. But as it applies to him specifically, he still has not had that surgery. And now his 2021 season is very much in jeopardy. So, depending on what happens following the 21 season, there could be like a legit 3.5-year span between when Seranthony Dominguez burst onto the scene with this explosive stuff and when he actually makes his return as a back end of the bullpen guy, which is crazy to think. But his career right now sort of is just in complete jeopardy. But from an organizational standpoint, it's fair to question it. But you do have to look at the players' wishes and how they want to proceed with their own treatments as well. We saw that with Deshaun Jackson this past season with the hernia situation with the Eagles. I mean, the player has to buy in and agree to it as well. And in the case of Dominguez specifically, I know that there was a little initial reluctance there.
Bob Wankel covers the Phillies, crossingbroad.com, as we're getting ready for spring training 2.0 to kind of lift off here. I guess, the Spencer Howard thing, I think, is maybe one of the biggest things. What they do with Alec Boehm is going to be another intriguing thing. I guess the next thing is, and I don't know, you shuffle your brain back to spring training in March and see what they were doing. Center field, how does that kind of work, play out? Does it change because there's only 60 games as opposed to 162? Quinn's a guy that I know Klintak said, hey, how do you keep this guy out of the lineup, while admitting that Hazley played very well. So only 60 games. Does that alter the center field plan?
It may. I know that Joe Girardi, as Camp 1.0 was progressing, started to kind of become seduced by Roman Quinn's athleticism and natural ability. I mean, I like Roman Quinn a lot. And to be honest with you, if we're talking about how do we make the Phillies the most competitive team they can possibly be in 2020, with that 60-game condensed schedule, I would think long and hard about giving more reps, giving more starts to Roman Quinn. I think the talent is there. Obviously, you cannot get through any description of him without talking about the injuries. But, again, I think that he is you want my honest opinion, I believe he's a better player than Adam Hazley. I do. And I think he brings more to the table. And I think that his skill set is something that this team needs and that this lineup needs. And when he got going a year ago, prior to getting injured, he got off to a rough start. But when he started to heat up, he made a big difference in that lineup. And so I could see with this schedule being laid out the way it is, not that he'll start 40 games or 45 games, but I think you may see more Roman Quinn than you otherwise would have.
Yeah, the speed is absolutely game-changing. It just comes down to if he can stay healthy. But I do want to know, did Joe Girardi mention JT Realmuto today or anything when it comes to his contract?
He did. He basically just said that he doesn't think that it'll be a factor for his on-field play, that JT is a professional and that he looks really good right now. He's gotten a look at him over the last couple days down there. And so he gave a really, a pretty neutral answer, pretty, organizational-based answer, that he does not expect it to be a problem. But he did note that you never really know until you get into the season. So as far as the Realmuto contract situation goes down, I certainly did raise my eyebrows at Matt Klentak's answer on Monday. I do understand that the economics of the situation have changed. I don't think that he was lying, but it was just a really weird message to convey during that particular session. I don't think he needed to do it. And it certainly has created a little bit of angst, I would say, among the fan base.
Yeah, I'm definitely not a Matt Klentak guy, but when I heard him say that, it honestly felt like it was John Middleton's message, and he was just the messenger. It almost as if he's saying, look, we're not going to spend the $23 million that was reported before. Like, it just felt as if maybe that was the message coming from the owner. What do you think about that?
That's entirely possible. I mean, it's on record. You've probably talked about it. I'm sure you've read about it, that Don Middleton loves JT Realmuto and the wrestling connection and all of that. And that's been all really well documented. But none of that's going to be what ultimately gets this deal done. And the one thing that I think the Phillies have to be a little bit careful with is that you took them to arbitration, and they were well within their right. I mean, we saw how that played out. But you take a guy to arbitration, you tout him as the best catcher in baseball. Universally, baseball people agree with that. But now you go through this no-contact negotiation period. The moratorium period ends, and rather than quickly striking a deal, you're posturing through the media about how the economics of the game have changed and that they have to reevaluate the situation. And if I'm JT Realmuto, I know that at the end of the day, it's all about the dollars, but there's got to be a little bit of, there has to be a part of me that says, I don't like what these guys are doing. I don't love how I'm being treated right now. And I do think that is a consideration that the Phillies have to think about as they move forward with this negotiation. I don't doubt that the Phillies want to sign JT Realmuto to a contract extension, but I don't doubt either that JT Realmuto wants to get something close to what he felt he was going to get entering this spring.
Yeah, Bob, and obviously the message there was a little crazy on from Clintack's angle. We saw Bryce Harper wearing the Realmuto shirt the other day, I think it was today or yesterday, as kind of like, hey, I'm sticking up for my guy here. But do you anticipate that this thing can get a little messy?
I do. I think the longer it goes on, the more messy it gets. Like, if you're really hoping for JT Realmuto to be here for the next 5 or 6 years, then you want to see this deal come together in the next 3 weeks. I mean, I think if we get to opening day and this isn't done, the likelihood of it happening decreases. And that's not to say, I think that we live in a world, especially when we're connected to Twitter all the time and we see these news updates, we tend to overreact to things a little bit. Like, you saw how the negotiations in baseball went. Like, they're never going to play. The game is ruined forever. Nobody's going to care. Like, that was all hyperbole. And so I don't want to make it sound like the Phillies can't re-sign JT Realmuto if this thing drags on throughout the season and into the offseason. But I do think that the chances of it happening diminish if it doesn't happen in the next 3 weeks.
Let's just say that $23 million, which was reported, is in play. 30 to 36 when we're talking about his age. I know the DH is coming to the National League, so that definitely plays a factor. But do you think that that's too much money for someone like JT Realmuto with where he is in his career?
The key to this whole thing for me is what happens during the 2022 season. Are they going to play baseball that year? Because if they don't, and you're coming back in 2023, JT Realmuto is now a 32-year-old catcher on the second year of that extension. And I think that you have to consider that. Like, I don't know that you can move forward in a negotiation with the assumption that there may be a lockout forthcoming, but we see the nastiness between these two sides, and that's a very real possibility. And if you're the Phillies and you're evaluating the situation, I do think it's at least something you have to consider. To answer your question, I would tell you that I believe 3-4 years down the line that JT Realmuto will still be one of the 5 best catchers in baseball. $23 million a year, though, is a lot. You better have a really strong plan B in place, though, if you're going to move on past this guy. And forget that they traded Sixto Sanchez and, Jorge Alfaro for him, and that they're kind of hamstrung in that regard. They have to do it from an optics standpoint. Why go out and sign Zach Wheeler to a 5-year deal worth $118 million? Why sign Bryce Harper to this mega deal if you're not going to keep core pieces in place that can help you win over the next 2-3 years while Harper and Wheeler are in their prime? And so to me, you can't take that step backward and then sell to these guys, hey, we're doing everything we can to win. And that's why at the end of the day, I believe ultimately something gets done. But it's a very complicated situation, as Matt Clintack curiously was forthcoming about on Monday. Like I said, I don't know that I would have said that if I were him, but he's not lying either.
All right, Bob Wankel covers the Phillies, crossingbroad.com. Bob, how impactful is Joe Girardi as the manager, and has that diminished because of the designated hitter being entered in? I mean, when you look at a manager, their impact is mostly, in a National League game. Does the impact of adding Girardi change because of the DH? Or does that not play as big of a factor as maybe I'm saying? I mean, what is the impact of Girardi, and how has the designated hitter kind of impacted that impact?
Yeah, I mean, from a strategic standpoint, utilizing a DH does take away from the tactical maneuvers. And so I think that the boost that you may have gotten from him is negated in a way in that regard. But I'll tell you this. One of the issues, and I was a pro Gabe Kapler guy for the most part. I just felt that he was sort of dealt a weak roster and ultimately was sort of scapegoated for that team's shortcomings. But there was a lack of accountability. No matter who you ask, there was a lack of urgency and accountability in that clubhouse a year ago. And whether or not that's all Gabe Kapler's fault, that's ultimately going to fall at the feet of the manager. I will tell you this. The teams this year that have the most accountability to their manager, to one another, to the organizations are going to be the teams that fare the best. The ability to adhere to social distancing policies, the care and attention to detail and trying to keep yourself healthy throughout the course of the season could very well be the thing that determines the fate of teams across the league. I mean, right now, would you say that the Phillies and the Mets are all that different from one another? Probably not. Would you say that the Nationals and Braves are a little bit ahead of the Phillies? Sure. But if the Braves don't take the same care and precautions that the Phillies do, well, there's your great equalizer right there. I mean, the coronavirus, the way that I equate it, it's like a shallow fly ball going into left center field, and your shortstop, your center fielder, and your right fielder all converging on it and knocking one another out. Well, you could have the best team in baseball, but if you take those three players out of the lineup, all of a sudden you become mighty ordinary. And so to me, Joe Girardi's reputation, his ability to get a message across, and the respect that the players are going to have for him is really where the true upgrade is, at least for the 2020 season. I think that could be the key thing that people are sort of overlooking here.
I loved everything about this conversation until you mentioned that you were a Gabe Kapler guy. He's a hate the face for me. I just can't stand looking at him.
Hey, listen, I have a little bit, and that's fine. That's fair. But I have a little bit of a coaching background, so I'll always sort of side on the, I'll always go with the side of the manager.
Well, I'll say this. I do know that every single thing that he did, it was all number-based, and he just did what he was told. He was the puppet. So I get that it wasn't as if he was making those decisions himself, but, Bob, he rubs people the wrong way.
It's funny that you say that, though, Bob, because I coach as well, and I said the same thing is, why I wasn't a huge Kapler guy, the point that I made was we're judging him based on a game that is no longer being played. The fans are judging these managers and the decisions based on the decisions that were made in 2010.
Oh, I'm just basing this off of pure personality.
Well, that's different. Right, but like people judge Kapler based on a game that is no longer being played. He's managing the game in a style that is played now, which the fans are not in favor of, so they're judging him based on a game that is really not being played anymore.
I agree with that. I think fans were focused on the early missteps that he had going back to 2018, not having guys warmed up on time. You remember how he was booed on
Bob, it happened. It started on opening day when he
took
pulled
Aaron Nola out of
64
pitches.
He never recovered from opening day.
Yeah, I think it was really about the press conferences and always kind of being overly positive when he shouldn't have been. I think fans got hung up on the wrong things, but you're right. It's more about the style of baseball being played now and less about really what he did, especially during the 2019 season. A manager's job these days is about setting culture, setting expectations, keeping guys motivated, and you could question whether or not he was particularly good at those things. And if you want to criticize him in that regard, I think that's entirely fair.
All right, Bob Wankel, Crossing Broad, at Bob Wankel CB on Twitter for more on the Phillies as they get ready to start their season. And, of course, he, like all guests, appeared via the Boardwalk Honda hotline. Have a great 4th of July weekend, Bob. Stay safe.
Hey, guys, thanks for having me. I'll talk to you soon.